Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will solve Plato's number of the bride, and by default, explore the geometry of the hypercube. This presentation is dedicated to the professional Platonic philosopher who is in search for this number, and to the numerically minded person who sees numerical correlations in everything, and on that desperate quest to solve what it all means. Within Book 8 of Plato's Republic, specifically section 546b, Plato discusses a number commonly called the number of the bride. This number has also been called the nuptial number and also the geometric number. Now, for orientation, we will familiarize you with a translation. Quote, "Hard in truth it is for a state thus constituted to be shaken and disturbed. But since for everything that has come into being destruction is appointed, not even such a fabric as this will abide for all time, but it shall surely be dissolved, and this is the manner of its dissolution. Not only for plants that grow from the earth, but also for animals that live upon it. There is a cycle of bearing and barrenness for soul and body, as often as the revolutions of their orbs come full circle, in brief courses for the short-lived and oppositely for the opposite. But the laws of prosperous birth or infertility for your race, the men you have bred to be your rulers, will not for all their wisdom ascertain by reasoning combined with sensation, but they will escape them, and there will be a time when they will beget children out of season. Now for divine begettings there is a period comprehended by a perfect number, and for mortal by the first, in which augmentations dominating and dominated, when they have attained the three distances and four limits of the assimilating and the dissimilating, the waxing and the waning, render all things conversable and commensurable with one another, whereof a basal 4/3 wedded to the pempad yields two harmonies at the third augmentation, the one the product of equal factors taken 100 times, the other of equal length one way but oblong, one dimension of 100 numbers determined by the rational diameters of the pempad lacking one in each case, or of the irrational lacking two, the other dimension of 100 cubes of the triad, and this entire geometrical number is determinative of this thing, of better and inferior births. This number has been deliberated and conjectured upon since the time that it was written, and has stumped some of the greatest minds of humanity, to include Aristotle, Proclus, Ficino, Galileo, Kepler, and many others. Many of these men have come up with various numbers that, while well-educated speculations, fall short for lack of wanting, due primarily to the following factors. Number one, Plato encrypted many things within his dialogues, and this particular passage is notoriously difficult to understand. He stated so in his laws that, quote, ciphering and arithmetic make one subject. Number two, understanding Plato is only as good as a translation from Greek to English will warrant. Not only are there the usual academic challenges of lexicon, syntax, grammar, and structure, but there are also many playful elements to his dialogues which require a keen insight into Plato's thought pattern and Greek thought in general. Number three, as the famous translator Jowett pointed out in his translations of the dialogues of Plato, the fundamental problem is that, quote, the obscurity arises from our want of familiarity with the subject. In other words, Jowett was saying we really don't know what in the world Plato was talking about. But indeed, while Jowett may have identified the generalized problem, truly the real culprit behind the confusion and the primary problem that I see is that the nature of the fractal, being a hypercube, is very elusive. Specifically, one can enter the fractal from multiple points of view, and then while inside of the fractal, run around in circles, chasing numbers that harmonize in some order of magnitude or other morphic qualities such as self-inversion within each point of view, which we will discuss in some depth. So, how do we solve this dilemma? Well, the best method is to know the answer already, then reverse engineer Plato's analogy Then corroborate the answer by cross-comparison of the various translations. Then, to be certain, we can conduct a further internal check on learning by expanding our aperture to Plato's other dialogues, as well as with corroboration of cross-cultural knowledge of the day and time. And finally, we can align the information to our contemporary scientific astronomical knowledge to see if everything correlates. So, using this methodology, and without further ado, here is the answer. Plato's allegory, commonly called the number of the bride, is describing the microcosmic relationship of man fractally enjoined or married with the universe, popularly known by the Hermetic axiom of as above, so below. Specifically, he encrypted three effulgent fractals, those being the human gestation period and the harmonic ratios of music, both of which correlate with the cycle of the earth known as the Great Year. Knowing this, Plato's number is found to be 12,960, which is one half of the precessional cycle of the Great Year. So with this, we will disassemble 6 different respectable translations and begin with analyzing the first relevant sentence. Please feel free to pause this presentation in order to read all translations, as I will only read 1 or 2 for comparison. So the first sentence generally reads the same among these translations, quote, but the period to that which is divinely generated is that which the perfect number comprehends. Now, instantly, we are transported to the perfect numbers, which are a very rare form of number where the integer is equal to the sum of its positive divisors. So rare, in fact, that there is only 1 in the 10 digits, 1 in the 100s, 1 in the 1000s, and 1 in the 10,000s, etc. Now, the first perfect number is the number 6, and this was known by the Pythagoreans. In fact, the Pythagoreans had noticed a synchronistic correlation between both the minimal human gestation period of 216 days and that of the ratios of music intervals on the right of your slide. The first stage is completed in 6 days, the second in 8, and 8 to the ratio of 6 is, in music terms, a fourth. The third stage, making flesh, takes 9 days, and 9 to the ratio of 6 is the fifth. In the next 12 days, the body is formed, and 12 to the ratio of 6 is the octave or harmonic. And 6 plus 8 plus 9 plus 12 equals a total of 35 days. Now, 216 equals 6 times 35 plus 6, or expressed as 6 times 36, and contains 6 together with 6 times itself, giving a metaphysical result for the microcosm of all origin, or the unit. Here, it is of particular interest to note that, excluding 6, all perfect numbers have a digital root of 1, which is the unit. Now, let us focus our attention on the left of the slide. Here, and within Plato's dialogue Timaeus, we find an encoded account of the musical creation of the universe, where he uses a double tetractys in the shape of the Greek letter lambda, comprising 2 sets of 4 progressions that enclose the musical scale of the world soul, also known as divine providence. Notice that this beautiful expression begins at the apex with the transcendent unity of 1, which harmonizes both unfolding and cascading double and triple harmonic intervals following 2 geometric numerical progressions, those being 1, 2, 4, and 8, or even numbers on the left, and 1, 3, 9, 27, or odd numbers on the right, down to the 4th term, the 4th being the form where solid realities are produced. Now, these observations are credited to the genius of Theon of Smyrna, who was a Greek philosopher and mathematician of the 1st century CE, whose work was strongly influenced by the Pythagorean school of thought. However, for the purposes of this presentation, we will go deeper into this fractal in order to fully understand its significance. So, the first thing we will unpack and observe is that, excluding 1, when the music intervals are multiplied by their integers, the result is a product of 6. Notably, that 2 times 3 equals 6. And in the third interval, that 4 times 9 equals 36, which is 6 times 6. And finally, the fourth interval, in which 8 times 27 equals our sought-after number of 216, and to which completes the expression of form, both within the music intervals of the macrocosm of the universe and also within the microcosm of man. Also, you may notice that adding the terms of the fourth interval, which is 8 plus 27, sums to 35, which is yet another embedded fractal expression of the human gestation period noticed by the Pythagoreans, and which serves as an axiomatic or self-expressed check on learning. Now, having unfolded the fractal to this point of understanding, we can dive even further, and I wish for you to notice that the results of the intervals can also be expressed in powers. For 2 times 3 equals 6, and what is 6 other than 6 to the first power? And 4 times 9 equals 36, which is 6 times 6, or 6 to the second power, or 6 squared. And 8 times 27 equals 216, or 6 times 36, or 6 times 6 times 6, or 6 to the third power, or 6 cubed. And as we know, from our third dimensional point of view, the cube represents form. And it is so and holds true within Plato's double tetractys as well. Now bear with me as I take you one step further for the sake of necessity to understand the fractal. So following the logic, the question is posed, what is beyond the fourth interval, which is the interval of form, the interval of solidity, the interval of the cube? Well, the answer holds that the next interval is the doubling of the even number 8, which equals 16, multiplied by the harmonic counterpart of tripling the odd number of 27, which equals 81, which in and of itself is 9 squared, and the result of the harmonic interval of 16 times 81 equals 1296, or 36 times 36, or 6 times 6 times 6 times 6, or 6 to the fourth, or, and most importantly, 6 to the hypercube. The word hypercube meaning beyond the cube, and by default beyond the world of form. So let us recapitulate this knowledge because it is extremely important for you to understand. To the power of 1 is linear. To the power of 2 is rectilinear, or squared or rectangled, which is an oblong square. To the power of 3 is to be cubed, or the third dimensional world of solid form in which you live. And most importantly, the fourth power is the mathematical expression of the hypercube, or the fourth dimensional world beyond solidity or forms, and this is the realm in which anyone seeking enlightenment is trying to attain. Let me put this in an even more euphemistic manner. To the left of the slide, you live here with the smiley face, but you want to live here among the stars. Then without question, you must apply your mind, and to be very clear, you must use your mind to balance your heart, which will complete the circuit within and connect you with Source. To put it another way, you must think yourself out of hell, and no one can do it for you but you yourself. Second sentence, and I'm reading Adam's translation, second from the top. Quote, for a human creature, the number is the first in which root and square increases, comprehending 3 distances and 4 limits of elements that make like and unlike, wax and wane, render all things conversable and rational with one another. Now, notice that dispersed among these translations, you can already begin to see a pattern of musical language. However, some of these translations do not carry forward the language of music and approach Plato from a purely mathematical perspective. Here it is that we can highlight problem number 2, in that understanding Plato is only as good as a translation will warrant. Now, on the left of the slide, we can see that from the numerical point of view, the number 2 perfectly corresponds with Plato's analogy, as the number 2 added to itself produces 4, and alternately multiplied by itself also produces 4, which means that 4 is the limit of 2. And the numbers 2 and 4, or 2 squared, encompass the number 3, or as Plato puts it, comprehends the 3 distances of 4 limits. So, on the right of your slide, one can also view Plato's analogy as the number 8, and it is the number 8 which is the product of 2 cubed, which can be seen as encoding the 3 distances limited by 4, or as 2 cubed, or 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, which is 2 4 times over, is also 8, being in itself 4 plus 4. And we can also see that the harmonic double tetractys encodes the 3 intervals in which the 4th interval is the limit. And still moreover, it can also be viewed that Plato meant that the first perfect number being 6, coupled with the human number being 2, equals the number 8, which would seemingly corroborate this viewpoint. And the concept of 2 and 8 become of particular interest because 28, which is a mathematical conflation of the 2 and 8, happens to be the second perfect number. Now the numeral 2 is the general consensus for this passage, and I agree with this as well. However, think back to what I said previously, that the primary problem is that harmonic numbers can be seen from multiple points of view, and here I have demonstrated this point. And it only gets more complex as we move through Plato's passage, as he departs from the simple linear numbers and embarks into geometric concepts or number in form. Third sentence, and again, reading Adam's translation, second from the top, quote, of which 4 and 3 married with 5 yields 2 harmonies when thrice increased, the one equal and equal number of times, so many times 100, the other of equal length one way, but oblong. On the one side of 100 squares of rational diameters of 5 diminished by 1 each, or if of irrational diameters, by 2. On the other of 100 cubes of 3. Now, this is where it gets particularly tricky, and this sentence really constitutes the meat of the entire passage. So the first thing I noticed is that of all these translations, they all use a style that incorporates the theme of 100 squares, or 100 times, or 100 diameters, or some form of 100. However, the translation by Brumball, second from the bottom, stands alone in the fact that it stays true to the translation of musical notation rather than purely mathematical interpretations by the 100ths. Thus, from my point of view, this is the most accurate translation, and it is this translation that eventually renders Plato's true number of 12,960. And here we can see the geometry of the embedded puzzle within this passage. So starting on the left with the square, the pempad is a square of 5, or simply 5 squared, which renders a diagonal of square root 50, which can also be viewed as 5 times root 2, which is a mirror expression of the area of 25. Now with this geometry solved, we can deduce the rational and irrational components described in Plato's passage. And the rational component of the diagonal of root 50 is actually root 49, as it is the nearest rational square to root 50. Now we are told to reduce the rational component by 1, which gives us 48. And we are also told to reduce the irrational component by 2, which 50 minus 2 equals 48 as well, which corroborates this number. Now for the irrational component, we are told that this number, which we have deduced to be 48, is one side or width of the oblong, which would be a rectangle. And the other side or length of the oblong is found in the final sequence of this passage, which says that the ladder harmony, 100 cubes of 3. Now this number is 270, in which can be found as in a fractal from multiple angles or viewpoints, but the answer comes down to 270. We can see that 100 cubes of 3 may be interpreted as 3 times 3 times 3 equals 27 to the third order of magnitude, and then taken to the 100th interval, which is my preferred method, where we can interpret 100 cubes of 3 as 300, then infer that because Plato previously said in order of sequence, reduce irrational by 1, then the rational by 2, that he left you to infer reducing the last element by 3, which is 1, 2, and 3, which also gives 270. We're looking at this in a third manner. It could be that Plato meant to encode that 48, which is our prime operator, multiplied by 5, which is the pempad, equals 240, and 240 plus 30 equals 270. In any case, the result of a rectangle whose width is 48 and length is 270 is an area of 12,960. And here it is that I concluded that Plato's number of the bride is in fact 12,960, or 6 hypercubed. Now, please take note that the number of the bride can also be beautifully expressed as 36 times 360, which is the degrees in a circle. I ask you to take note of this because in the next few slides, I wish to show you some of the conjugate geometry and correlating mathematics of some alternate viewpoints within the fractal that also correspond with this passage. This slide serves to show you the thought process of mathematical computations inside of the fractal. As you can see, once inside of the mathematical fractal, there are many routes you can go, each revealing a mathematical expression of the same numerical sequences, just varying in orders of magnitude. And in fractal mathematical terms, this is called scaling. And scaling, or orders of magnitude, is just one of the properties of a fractal, others being such things as tiling or self-inversion. The problem is in that chasing these paths, it will lead you to very similar answer of some degree, but not ultimately to what we are looking for. Now, from the point of view of oblong triangles or rectangles, depending on your point of view, and specifically with the Pythagorean triangle, you can see that I have unpacked many avenues of understanding how the 3 and 4 may be married to the pempad. Of particular interest, notice that 3 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 5 cubed equals 216, which again is our minimum human gestation period. Also notice that 1 hypercubed, that is to the 4th power, plus 2 hypercubed plus 3 hypercubed equals 6 hypercubed, or 1,296. Again, please feel free to pause this slide in order to absorb the equations. And another method to conceive of the 4 and 3 married to the pempad can be seen in the calculations for the equilateral triangle. Of interest when using the equilateral triangle, if a side is measured at 4,320, then the perimeter equals 12,960, which is our number of the bride, and exactly 1/2 of the great year. Now, also notice that each of the 3 internal angles equals 60 degrees, and if each side is bisected, it creates 6 Pythagorean triangles inside of the equilateral triangle. And if we apply the fractal property of tiling to the equilateral triangle, we get a static hypercube, that is a cube within a cube. And the perimeter of this cube equates to 25,920, which is the exact amount of years within the great year. Additionally, we begin to form some beautiful sacred geometries to include the hexagram, or hexad, and the pentagram, or the pempad. Now this rendition is composed of 6 times 6, or 36, Pythagorean triangles, and each of these can be fractally scaled in more ways than one, to cascade into a never-ending holomorphic function. Of all the ways that 3 and 4 are married to the pempad, this one is my favorite. Okay, last sentence. And to close out Plato's passage. So the last sentence is very similarly translated in each case, consisting of the whole geometric number being the author or controller or sovereign of better and worse births. But from these, the most direct is Adam's translation in 1902, which clearly states that the number is a number measuring the earth. And the measurements hold true to form, for the polar circumference of the earth is 21,600 nautical miles, which is a higher order of magnitude or scaled version of the human gestation period of 216 days, and also the harmonic intervals. And this is married with the second measurement, that being the equatorial circumference of 24,900 miles. Now, when we measure the celestial dome at 72 years for one arcangle, the heavens complete a great year cycle of 25,920 solar years, in which the positive and negative halves of the sine wave are 12,960 years each. Furthermore, take the mean between the sidereal year of 24,000 years and the tropical year of 25,920 years, and you get a measurement of 24,960, which is a perfect match to the equator plus 60. Ladies and gentlemen, here we can see conclusive evidence that Plato's number is in fact 12,960, for it and only it matches all the criteria of his riddle. 12,960 is the number of the earth and is responsible for the waxing and waning of better and worse births. Through the course of the 25,920 year period known in the West as the Great Year, or among the Hindus as the most common Yuga cycle. Now you may notice that I have placed Saturn on the Earth. Now this is because the Great Year begins in the age of Aquarius, to which Saturn, or Kronos to the Greeks in ancient astronomy, rules both Aquarius and its neighboring sign of Capricorn for a total of 4,320 years. And according to celestial time, we have officially ascended above the galactic plane and are now in year 1 of the age of Aquarius and the 25,920 year long Great Year. And if you know Plato, then you'll know that this is why the motif of searching for justice runs throughout the course of the entirety of his dialogues, as Saturn rules justice, and why he wrote the myths of Atlantis and Arcadia, because this is the time of them both. This is also the beginning of the Hindu Satya Yuga, the age of truth, as Satya is ruled by Saturn. Even more bizarre is that this must mean that Plato knew the measurements of the spherical version of the Earth way before our time, and that the measurements are in perfect synchronicity with circling the square. Now let us unpack the number of the bride even further in order to discover its inherent qualities, those qualities being the qualities of a fractal: scaling, complexity, tiling, self-similarity, also known as expanding and unfolding symmetry, mirroring, self-reflection, refraction, homomorphism, shear mapping, etc. So the first thing we should observe is that the number 12,960 is a composite number, as it has 25 total divisors. We should notice that 25 in itself is the square of 5. The number of the bride also has 60 factors. We have already discussed the running theme of 60, and which in itself is a superior, highly composite number. Now, among the number's divisors and factors, we see a series composed of the first 14 highly composite numbers, those being numbers that have more divisors than any smaller positive integer than itself. This series of the first 14 highly composite numbers are 1, 2, 4, 6, 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 120, 180, 240, 360, 720. All those are bold and italicized. And you should immediately think of the 14 pieces of Osiris. Additionally, embedded within the highly composite numbers, we also see a series of the first 6 superior highly composite numbers, those being numbers that have the highest ratio of divisors to some positive power of itself than any other number, which makes it even more restrictive than the previously highly composite numbers. This series of superior highly composite numbers are 2, 6, 12, 60, 120, and 360, highlighted in red. Here we will note that it is this series of high composition that renders basically every holy number or mystical number. You will recognize that among this series, and I'll highlight some correlative religious motifs, we find 72, the 72 names of God, 96 petals from 1 through 6 chakras, 144, the 144,000 saints, 144,000 doors in Valhalla, 180, a pie, 360 around the circle, 108, auspicious signs of Buddha's on Buddha's feet, 1080, the moon's radius, 5040, the ideal number of citizens for Plato's city in the Republic. And the list goes on. Additionally, these are the numbers that you find in the Platonic solids, the various Sumerian kings lists, the Egyptian kings list, and the extremely large Hindu cycles of time. They are also encoded in the Giza pyramids, the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant, New Jerusalem, Valhalla, and many others. So the big question is, why? And the answer is because these are the numbers, a number being nothing more than a symbol, that encode the path of least resistance. In other words, light travels the path of least resistance, and these mathematical symbols show you that path. Now, in order to understand the fractal properties inherent within the number of the bride, we will rearrange and unfold it. The first thing we notice is that our number has 60 factors. Next, we see these 60 factors can be rearranged or organized into 30 pairs, and we can further arrange these pairs into 12 quintuplets and 6 twins. Now, of these twins, 2 of these sets of twins has a complementary set of twins who are in themselves identical, but not identical to the complementary set. In other words, they are similar, but not the same. And in our final arrangement, we can find that 2 sets of these twins stand alone with no complement. And lastly, that one of these sets is a perfect mirror image of itself, or in other words, a perfect set of twinning. And that is the set of 36 times 360 and 360 times 36. Now please take note that this entire slide is laid out in normal, linear, left to right thinking, and as such it is hard to comprehend this information, let alone comprehend any further unfoldment. So what we must do is arrange or rearrange the information into a mirroring symmetrical fashion where your mind can better digest it or process it. Now, from this rearrangement of linear symmetry and into mirroring symmetry, your mind can make more sense of the information for the simple fact alone that it is now more organized and thus more harmonic. Also, because of such a rearrangement, we can unfold it even further and discover more of its mirroring properties. Now, the first thing we can observe is that the entire diagram is a mirrored inversion, and our quintuplets are actually mirrored inversions in orders of magnitude of themselves. For example, the first row consists of a quintuplet of 1 times 12,960 and 10 times 1,296, and its mirroring inversion of 1,296 times 10 and 12,960 times 1. Secondly, notice that the entirety of the diagram, the numbers are chronologically organized or ordered. An example, beginning from left, you have 1 descending to 9 and 12 descending to 36, and their corresponding multiplicative of 12,960 descending to 1,440, and 1,080 descending to 360. And this organized pattern proceeds throughout the diagram. Now that we have the number of the bride in proper arrangement, we can get to the heart of the fractal. So please note that while our 14 quintuplets reflect themselves, note where our 6 sets of twins are located. And those are 5 times 2,952, which does not have a corresponding symmetry. And down at the bottom, we have 36 times 360, which also does not have a corresponding symmetry. Now, the other sets of twins, which are similar but not the same, are found at 15 and 32, in which the inner set of twins are similar to the outer set of twins, but indeed are located in their proper place within the entirety of the diagram. So what are we to make of this? Well, let's find out. So we'll begin with the uppermost set of twins, which is 5 times 2,592. Now we can see that it is the numerical sequence of 50 that is missing from the tenths column, and inserting this information, we will get 50 times 259.2 and its mirror inversion of 259.2 times 50. Now this is called a decimal reflection because the only way to achieve the mirroring sequence is to reflect it through a decimal expansion. But we can see that it is indeed a mirror reflection. Now what about 36 times 360 at the bottom? Well, if we apply the same method, we do not get a decimalized mirror reflection, but a carbon copy of the whole expression. And this is called a whole reflection, or a perfect reflection, or in terms of light, a total internal reflection. You can also think of it as the 0 point in a Cartesian coordinate system. All of this tells us that 36 times 360 is the exact center of balance of the number of the bride, as it and only it is in perfect balance with itself. Now what about our similar but not the same set of twins? Well, applying the same mathematical principles, we find that each have not a decimalized reflection, but a decimal refraction, which is a bending of light in another direction. Think of the bending of an image of a pencil in a glass of water. So notice that the twins of 15 times 864 decimalizes and moves inward and downward, while the twin set of 96 times 135 decimalizes and moves outward and upward. These are decimal refractions. Now it is also interesting to note that 96 times 135 actually refracts in 2 places. And this is called a twinned refraction, like a twinned rainbow. Now, the more you explore this diagram, the more natural mirroring symmetrical qualities we will find. For example, we can find that all these harmonic numbers can be decimalized. Now we can use the main diagram, but I'd like us to focus on the decimalized diagram on the right and in red in order to show you the natural harmonic sequences that continue within the number of the bride. And those are where 300 and 400 are located together as they are mirroring inversions, and also where 600 and 800 are located as they are also mirroring inversions of one another. And if you pay particularly close attention, you will see that these encode a tripolarized cyclic function or cyclic permutation. For example, 43.2 times 300 is equal to 32.4 times 400, wherein the decimal expansion, you can see that the 4 moved in a cycle or circle around the triple harmonic and onto the other side. In other words, 432 became 324, and it is the same for 216 and 162. Now, notice that on either side of where these mirroring inversions are located, those being the pair of 300 and 400, the pair of 600 and 800, there is no division of 7. That is 7, 70, and or 700 are missing from our diagram. So what is going on here? Well, this is due to the properties of expansion and contraction, and it applies in math just as it applies to the law of light, as math is nothing more than the descriptive symbology of light. For example, notice that if you contract 300 and 400 equals 700. But in math terms, you know this is addition. However, also notice that if you expand the space between 600 and 800, we also see that 700 fills this space. And another way to get this is to add the terms 600 and 800, then divide by 2 as the mean number, and you get the ratio of 700. We can also notice that 600 and 800 are a doubling of 300 and 400. Now, so far we have only discussed properties within whole numbers and their decimal equivalents. And at this time it is proper to introduce into this enfoldment the constants. And both of these pairs are conjugate with a constant. Specifically, the pair of 3 and 4 are conjugate with 3.14, or pi, and the pair of 6 and 8 are conjugate with 1.618, or phi. Now, for the time being, this serves as a placeholder for the introduction of constants, which we will explore further. But let us take a pause from this and summarize what we have learned so far. What we have found is that by conceptualizing the relationships between math and light, they turn out to be one and the very same thing. In other words, math is describing light, which is the one thing that is everything. And this is clearly evidenced by the fact that they share the same essence of language. For example, in the language of light, polarization, those being positive, negative, and neutral polarities, are essentially the very same thing as abundant, deficient, and perfect numbers in the language of mathematics. Or even more interesting, if we expand our aperture a little more broadly, we can see that this also applies to the essential languages of both music and religion, wherein all four sciences are in fact commensurable with one another. In other words, light is everything. Math is the scientific numerical measurement of light. Music is the scientific auditory measurement of light. And religion is the deification of personified light, that is, light expressed in human form. If you keep expanding this out, you will find that everything is commensurable, which extrapolated out to its totality solves the grand unification theory. And these and many other expansions of these are the reasons why, when someone asks me, "So, what God do you worship?" I always answer, "I worship the Almighty God, light itself. Put whichever personified face you wish upon it." In other words, if you prefer the effeminate face of Jesus or Krishna, that is fine. Or if you prefer no personification, such as Allah, this is fine as well. Or if you prefer the face of nature and the creation itself, such as the Hermetics, this is also fine and acceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes Plato's Number of the Bride. If you like this information, please subscribe and feel free to provide constructive feedback. Thank you for your time and attention.